All right, we're going to call to order the Lake Mills City Council for February 6, 2018. Let's please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Fields?
Here.
Mr. Foster?
Here.
Mr. Fritsch?
Here.
Ms. Schmidt? Here. Mr. Knippel? And Mrs. Fritsch previously informed staff that she'd be unavailable this evening.
Moves us to item number 3, correction and approval of the City Council minutes. And we're going to do these, we'll do them in 2 blocks. We'll do January 2nd first. Do we have a motion for approval of the City Council minutes?
So move.
And
Second.
And let's call the vote.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Fritsch?
Aye.
Ms. Schmidt?
Abstain.
Mr. Fields?
Aye.
Motion passed 3-0.
And then we need a motion of approval for the minutes, City Council minutes for January 16th and January 30th.
So move.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Mr. Fritsch?
Aye.
Ms. Schmidt?
Aye.
Mr. Fields?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Motion passed 4-0.
Excuse me. Moves us into correspondence. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to bring up at this time?
Yeah, I got a letter from a constituent concerned about more procedure with some of the roadways with brine salt. And we talked to staff about it and got it cleared up.
So I was going to say, are we fully using brine right now?
At the beginning,
Okay.
as a precautionary.
Okay, does anybody else have anything? If not, I have one. I talked to a constituent that actually lives down on Franklin Street, and they were curious if there was any regulations on a time limit that the folks that had the fire on their house down there, how long they have to either clean or make any hazardous things go away for that house. So if you guys could look into that for us and just give us a heads up on what's going on with that, we'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Sure.
All right, this moves us into questions and public comment. The public is encouraged to address the council at this time regarding items on the agenda. Public comment may also be made at this time on items that are not on the agenda if you have registered with the city clerk before the meeting has been called to order. The state's open meeting law discourages action by the council on items not listed on the agenda. Please keep your comments limited to 3 minutes and state your name and address when starting your comments and fill out the sign-in sheet provided. This is your time.
I am Patricia Cicero. I live at 517 College Street. I'm also the Water Resource Management Specialist with the Jefferson County Land and Water Conservation Department. So the first thing I wanted to do was to talk a little bit about the Sandy Beach and Mill Pond work session that you had, because you had 2 presentations on those issues, and I attended those presentations. And both of those presentations, it was very interesting that and fitting that both presentations highlighted the fact that Rock Lake and the Mill Pond are great resources, and we should be valuing them. And this is why some of those projects are going forward. They're a great resource for the community, and they bring visitors to town. They're also economic resources. They bring residents and visitors to Lake Mills who support the local economy. And the city directly benefits from the higher property values of the lake properties and funds from the boat launches, the boat slips, and the beach fees. So it's important to protect the lake resources to ensure we continue to have benefits generated by the lake. Research and data show that Rock Lake is one of the best lakes in the region. And how do I know this? Well, with water quality, the clarity and the chlorophyll are above average for our area. The chlorophyll relates to the amount of algae that's out there. We need a little more work on phosphorus, but we're working on that. Habitat quality is also high. There's been aquatic plant surveys on the lake, and there's a mix of native aquatic plants that is also above average for our region. And these plants provide many benefits to the lake. In a survey of area residents, respondents were asked to indicate the activities that their families enjoy most about Rock Lake. The two activities that rose to the very top were scenic enjoyment and peace and tranquility, and I thought that was interesting. So with all these items in play, it's therefore vital that we carefully consider possible actions at Sandy Beach and at the Mill Pond. And during your deliberations, I urge you to ask a few questions. The first one is, how will proposed changes impact the many resources provided by the lake, including water quality, habitat, recreational amenities, scenic beauty, and peace and tranquility? And if we implement any changes, how can we incorporate practices that will protect and hopefully enhance these valuable lake resources? So one of the things I handed out to all of you and is available on the Rock Lake Improvement Association website is the executive summary of the Rock Lake Management Plan. And there are two specific recommendations that were made at the end of last year when we knew that these two studies were coming, but nothing had been released yet. And I'd just like to point you in the direction of those recommendations. One is in the middle of page 5. It's about the Mill Pond and Channel study. And it says the City of Lake Mills should hold a public comment session separate from a city council meeting to review options proposed in the Mill Pond and Channel dredging feasibility study prior to the city council making a final decision. And the group that made these recommendations was a broad group of executive steering committee. Steve Wilkie sat on that committee. And basically it was just noted that it's good to have a session outside of the city council meetings because then people can get presentations and have a more question and answer period and have it not be as formal as the city council meetings when you have a lot more other things to deal with. So then the Sandy Beach study was also mentioned on page 6. They also recommended that there be a public session outside of the city council meeting. And then the other recommendation was any development to the Sandy Beach and trailer park areas should include practices that result in no negative environmental and/or recreational impact to the lake, including water runoff, boat use and access, and recreational safety. Further, if no development is undertaken at Sandy Beach, the impacts to the lake of the current situation should be reviewed to identify practices that improve the impact that the park and its uses have to the lake. I'd also like to remind you that you have a group that works for you and the town of Lake Mills. That's the Joint Rock Lake Committee. They met right prior to this meeting tonight, and definitely they're a great resource. They're very hardworking, and I feel that if you want them to do any more research or you want their opinions on how things might affect the lake, I definitely advise you to turn to them. So that was my general comments on the Sandy Beach and the Mill Pond, but I know that you also have on your agenda tonight specific Mill Pond issues having to do with stormwater system improvement and also shoreline erosion control, and I was asked to go ahead and provide those comments now instead of waiting for your discussion, but certainly I'll be around for that discussion, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to partake in the meeting. So I read the report prepared by Strand Associates on the Mill Pond and Channel dredging feasibility study. And just so you know, I do plan to provide written comments on this report from the water resources perspective. But today I will only comment on the 2 items on your agenda. First of all, I support the improvements to the stormwater system because it will be beneficial to the water quality of the Mill Pond and Rock Creek. So I think that's a good thing to go forward. In terms of the shoreline erosion control, I support efforts to prevent sediment from entering the lake because it can impair fish and water quality. However, the decision on what to do should be carefully considered. And I think there's a difference also between the channel versus the mill pond, and all of my comments tonight have to do with the mill pond. I think the channel is a system that is fairly disturbed, and I think having dredging, I know that's not part of what you're talking about today, but done there, I would support that. So the mill pond is a designated DNR sensitive area because of the diversity of native plants that provide important habitat for many fish. There was a 2017 aquatic plant survey done there in the mill pond last year, and we documented 23 aquatic plant species, which actually is really good. It's more species than I've identified in some of the other lakes in the area, so it's a good amount of diversity. These plants provide food for fish and waterfowl, and shade and shelter for fish. For instance, there's one plant species in the mill pond that provides food for bluegills, smallmouth bass, and also largemouth bass. In 2013, there was a near-shore fish survey done on the lake and one site in the mill pond. And basically that survey is done every few years to provide another aspect of lake health. The small fish found in nearshore surveys and nearshore areas have been described as canaries in the coal mine because they can reveal lake or ecosystem stresses before some of the other traditional measurements such as water quality measurements. One site in the mill pond was surveyed in 2013, and it turns out it's located in the area where the vegetated boulder revetment is proposed. At that survey, at that site, we walked along 88 feet of the frontage there and employed a backpack shocker to temporarily shock the fish so we could get them and identify them. So, and then they're fine afterwards. We let them go and they're good. So there were 6 near-shore fish species found there: bluegill, yellow bullhead, bowfin, green sunfish, Iowa darter, and least darter. In the survey area, we documented 14 native aquatic plants. So the Iowa darter and least darter are important fish to the lake because they're considered intolerant species. They're intolerant because they're sensitive to poor water quality, siltation, increased turbidity, and reduced habitat diversity. In addition, the least darter is on the state's special concern list. And that special concern list is a list in which species are put on the list to focus attention on them before they potentially would get put on the threatened or endangered species list. Least darters have a strong affinity for aquatic vegetation and are vulnerable to habitat degradation. So going back to the vegetated boulder revetment that is proposed, it involves excavating into the bottom of the lake under the water and filling it with stone. So this work is being proposed exactly in the area where we found those sensitive fish species and the great diversity of aquatic plants. And part of my job with the county is to assist landowners with shoreline erosion control questions. So I regularly go to properties and give people advice on what they should be doing. And as part of that, I also have the ability to get a Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection engineering tech involved who has had a lot of experience with assessing and designing erosion control. So my suggestion going forward to you is I understand that there's a grant that you want to go for, potentially want to go for, to both address the stormwater system changes and also the shoreline erosion control. And I recommend that you go forward with that process. But before you apply for the grant, I would like to go out to the site with the Department of Agriculture Engineer Tech and assess it and see if there's other possibilities of what else you can do there that wouldn't be as intrusive to that area as that vegetated boulder revetment. And because there are some other lake-friendly practices that could be done potentially. And I'm happy to share this information with Strand so that we can move forward with something that doesn't negatively impact the fish in the lake. Thank you for your time.
Yep, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Generally, you made a statement saying the water quality seems to be fairly good. What's the overall health of the lake in your judgment and the mill pond?
So we definitely have more data on the lake because since the mid-'80s we have had yearly water quality sampling done on the lake. Rock Lake is really a high-quality lake in terms of the water quality and the diversity of habitat in it. The mill pond has not received water quality sampling, and we only included it in the aquatic plants survey last year. So I felt that the water, when I was there last year, and when I've been on the water in that area in the past, I feel that it does have good water clarity. There's definitely Eurasian water milfoil, which is an invasive species, both in the lake and in the mill pond. It hasn't caused a significant problem overall to Rock Lake. However, the percent of Eurasian water milfoil in there, in the mill pond, is a lot more. So there might be, I can see that there could be some issues with the Eurasian water milfoil, and we could potentially explore ways that that could be lessened.
Has there been any studies done on the marsh area south of the trestle?
Yes, the last...
Sorry, Patricia,
yeah.
hold on. Let's wait till we get to that item on the agenda, and then we'll ask Patricia to come back up. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank
I
you.
got lots of questions.
Yep. We'll suspend the rules and ask her to come back up when we
Okay,
get to that.
that's fine.
Thank you. All right, that moves us to the city manager's report.
The city manager presented to you in the packet the 2017 budget for the general fund and the capital, and that's as of December. The police department's monthly report for December, and minutes from the Jefferson County EDC for October and December.
Does anybody have any questions on any of that material? Hearing nothing, we'll move on. That moves us on to item 7, acceptance of the minutes of the Police and Fire Commission of December 21st, 2017, the Housing Authority October 24th, 2017, and the Library Board of November 20th, 2017, and those will go on record as written. Council business. The first one up is tavern operators licenses. Would you read those three names, please?
Mara Pineda, Claudia Kotwitz, and Joshua Hammer.
Do we have a motion of approval for these three licenses?
I move approval of the three applicants as presented.
Thank you. Any second?
Second.
All right, let's call a vote.
Ms. Schmidt? Aye. Mr. Fields?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Fritsch?
Aye.
Motion passed 4-0.
Next one is the secondhand jewelry dealer license.
Countryside Jewelry?
And this is something we do every year,
Yes.
correct? Yeah. Do we have a motion of approval for a secondhand jewelry dealer license for Countryside Jewelry?
So moved.
Second.
And let's call a vote.
Mr. Fields?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Fritsch?
Aye.
Ms. Schmidt? Aye. Motion passed 4-0.
Okay, that brings us on to item B, discussion of Mill Pond and Channel Dredging Study, Stormwater Improvements and Erosion Control Grant. And I'm making the assumption that is you, sir.
Yes. Hi, my name is John Lindert from Strand. I was here with Brandon Herbert in January, and we were asked by Steve Wilkie to come and talk a little bit more about the grant opportunity that we have there. So if you are ready, we can go down that path. So you would have seen this at that workshop last time, and so what we did was, what we had was a dredging feasibility study funded by a lake management planning grant. One of the things that we did in that was not only look at what it would take to maybe dredge the pond, but also what were some other things going on around the pond in terms of shoreline and stream bank erosion. So this is the assessment at the Mill Pond. These are some areas that we're showing some level of erosion, and we have severity levels that came from an NRCS methodology, 3 being more severe than 2, and there's a dilapidated kind of old concrete bulkhead, if you will, in that area that was kind of failing, so that was one of the areas identified. This was the channel, and if you go out there, you can see some of these pictures show relatively severe erosion through there, some bare banks, and so some need there for stream bank restoration. We talked about some of the options that you might have for restoring that, so replacing concrete with vegetative boulder revetment here. We also had more of a soil bioengineering technique with a coir fiber roll with some turf reinforcement mat for some of the other areas. And thank you for the comments, Ms. Cicero. These are just a couple of the options that are out there that we felt might be appropriate. One thing we would do if we went into design of something like this, you would actually survey the banks underwater and above water. A lot of times what you can do is take the bank from being steep to less steep, and that can open up some other options that you might have out there. So these are just a couple. We do a lot of different other ones as well. We felt they were appropriate at this stage of the game, but once we got to design, I would say, to address that comment, there's others that are out there, and we would certainly take any feedback that you might have on that. Likewise, along the channel, there's opportunities there for both of those techniques and others. So we put some costs together. Actually, let's step back a second. The stormwater treatment device assessment. This picture here shows kind of the watershed around the Mill Pond, with the stars being different outfalls that are there. We had outfall 1 as the priority because it drains a lot of the fire station lands, which has more of a pollutant load when you look at it from a stormwater perspective. And so we were recommending, or at least talking about some of the options there, one of being the SunTree nutrient separating baffle box, which looks a little bit like this. So water comes in, there's a stainless steel bin basically in there that takes vegetation, leaves, floatables, trash, and allows sediment to come out too before the water heads down to the mill pond. So it's one more kind of robust option. We put a couple of those in on some outfalls to Lake Monona in Monona. So people are using them. Some other lower cost options are what's called a SAFL baffle. Not sure what that exactly stands for, but it comes out of Minnesota. And basically it's a screen. So water would come in, there's a screen, and you can kind of see it here with holes in it. Sediment drops out before the water goes out to the mill pond. And then what's called a snout, which is like this, so it's a 90-degree turn-down elbow, so water comes in. There's a permanent water surface in here, so floatables, cans, things like that would float. You would, obviously in all of these, you'd have to maintain them, and so this kind of keeps, so I would, in terms of robustness, this is the most robust, and then less as you go down. And of course, the costs are commensurate with that. This would be a SAFL baffle with a snout, so the screen plus this 90-degree turn-down elbow. And so, you know, we think this is probably the highest priority. Perhaps you would go with something like this and maybe something like these on the other ones. They're smaller watersheds, but that's to be
Can I ask a
to be
question
determined.
on that?
Sure.
How effective as far as surface oil that drips onto the parking lot would that
Right.
catch?
Right. So this option here has a boom in it, and it would catch those materials. This would not. It would flow right through. This would, the surface oils would float. Of course, you have to maintain it. And then the combination of these two would also protect for oil and grease.
How much maintenance is required with these? Do they have to vacuum them pits out periodically, or?
Yes. Typically what I say is like once in the spring, potentially twice in the fall because of leaves. And so you go through a year or two, and then your public works guys will determine, hey, how often does this probably need to be maintained based on what you're seeing in the, you know, out in the field. But I would say maybe 3 times a year.
What do we have in there right now for any of these locations? Anything?
No, just pretty much runs right straight to the pond. It's becoming more typical to see these types of things as we redevelop the west side. You know, we're doing Lake Street in a couple of years and Fremont and College. We've already started planning the stormwater drainage over there and looking at similar types of things. When we did South Main Street, I'm trying to remember exactly, this will be a guess, but I think we started out with 60 and we ended up with 32 catch basins, which require maintenance at least once a year. So you're going to see a lot more of these in the stormwater type industry. It used to be that they had catch basins, then they came in and filled them all in and pushed the water right through, and now they're going back to some sort of treatment system.
Okay. So I think in your packet you have some of these numbers. At the last meeting, I don't know if we had the best answer for you right off the bat in terms of what the cost would be, but I'm going to kind of run through this. So the channel, if you were to do the channel restoration only, stream bank restoration, would be around $86,000. That includes a contingency for engineering and construction. If you were the pond restoration only, it'd be $51,000. If you were to couple those together, do both of those, it'd be about $107,000. And then these are the different costs as you saw on the previous screen. And so our costs were only at outfall 1. And if you want to do all of them, all the different outfalls, you have to add that into this. We only have the numbers for outfall 1 as we thought it was the priority through our study. So what we did is we took a stream bank restoration alternative, which was, okay, do all channel restoration and then do one of these. So we add the cost of this plus the cost of that would be $142,600. Down through here, if you did pond restoration, stream bank restoration, or shoreline restoration only, these are the numbers. And then if you did both, these would be the numbers. And so I highlighted the red boxes here to, on the next page, show you what that might cost if you got a grant. There's a couple different grant options. The reason for these was this was maybe the higher, this was a higher cost alternative, maybe this is a lower. It seems like the need for channel restoration maybe is more than the pond restoration need. But that's up to you guys, how far you want to go with that. But we'll go to the next slide, and there are two grant programs. In the agenda, it talks about the Urban Non-Point Source program, but there's also a targeted runoff management program that used to be active in funding things like this, and then it stopped being so, and more recently they've kind of put that back on the table where you could access those funds potentially. So I talked to the DNR today a little bit about this project, and I'd want to talk to them a little bit more since it's kind of a new program, at least for...
Do we have that document?
No, I don't see it.
This I actually added because I was
Okay.
thinking this might be a little bit tough to talk about, tonight. And so I added this, and I've got actually paper copies of this if you want. I can give you after. So the nice thing about the Targeted Runoff Management Grant is it's a 70-30 split versus a 50-50. And so if we go back, those red boxes there represent these four options, here, 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 here. And so if we take a look at those total costs and what would be the state and local share, you can see obviously it's better here where you'd be paying $50,000 versus $84,000, and the state would be paying more. This is a channel and pond restoration with sort of a higher end stormwater treatment. This is the channel and pond restoration with the saffle, baffle, and snout combination, which is kind of a compromise between the high end and the low end. And so you can start seeing how this might impact how much you guys would have to put in. This would be channel restoration only, 50-50, 70-30, and then channel restoration only with the saffle, baffle, snout. And there's more options than this. You can run the math for anything you'd want to choose. So that is the extent of my presentation, so I can take any questions you might have.
Do we have to be locked into these various different options before you even apply for the grant?
You would have to choose one to go after. If you were to choose to do something less expensive or more expensive, you would probably still get some grant monies, but they're not going to give you more money because you go for a more expensive option like after the fact. So the more you can make a decision, let's just say now, probably the better.
So we have to first decide which kind of grant we want, and then we have to decide whether we're going to go with the high end or the medium or the low end before you apply.
Yes, because we'd be putting those specific costs in the grant.
Okay, and you're only talking about Outfall 1. Will the grant also help us with other areas, or are we just strictly going with Outfall 1?
If you wanted to do all the other four, you certainly could do that. You'd have to add up, put more money into it. But they would be eligible at the same cost share rates.
What's the grant deadline for applying?
It's April 15th or 16th.
Okay.
Could we be turned down?
Yes. And the reason I went with, or when I wanted to look at this further, is because they have more money and they have less competition for that grant program at this point in time anyway. And we used to access that program, like I said, for stream bank restoration projects. And then they changed the criteria on that program, but they've now changed it back. So what I would like to do, I think you could go for either one. I want to confirm with the DNR on the targeted runoff management grant, a couple of eligibility things since it is so new. But you could do either one. And I would try to shoot for the targeted runoff management grant, and I think there's a case for that.
How committed or locked in are we if we wouldn't get the grant? Not at
So
all.
if you wrote the grant this year and submitted it, monies would be available January 1 of 2019. They would give you 2 years to get the thing designed and constructed, and a third year if you really wanted it. And the DNR has been pretty open about giving you this 1-year time extension, a single 1-year time extension. So within that 3-year time period, you'd need to say yes or no. Of course, the DNR doesn't like, people turning down money that they give, but it certainly happens.
It does count as a black mark in the next one.
Well, yeah, I can see that. But if we did the work and decided, no, we didn't want it, we're really not committed to any work. The only outlay we would have is what we've spent already on studies and things like that. I think, is that what you were referring to? Or were you thinking something else?
I'm just wondering, contingency planning.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on this, Steve? We haven't heard from you yet.
I guess I haven't looked at it real close. I'm kind of like you guys. I got
Yeah.
it last Thursday. I've been kind of busy. And so I haven't reviewed it real close. So I couldn't tell you if
But I guess, let me ask you this. If we were to pick an option as far as for the waste, for the water runoff, I'm assuming one of them would last probably longer. We would probably have a better lifespan if we went with with one of the first options over just the Saffel Baffle or something like that.
I think they probably have a similar life. I think maybe the larger units would take longer for them to fill up between times of maintenance.
What's the projected life?
I mean, it's like any other stormwater piece of infrastructure, a manhole, those last a long time. So,
60 years.
Okay. And obviously, it's something that will make the quality of the lake better, have less junk and stuff out there. How would this impact, I'm assuming, parks,
No, that's streets.
streets?
Yeah, the stormwater is streets, so it would have a significant impact because, like I said, we're planning to do a lot more of this. It'll become a much more regular activity with more people applied to it. So it's something where we're gonna have to look at, how we're gonna fund it all.
Right.
But it's, that's the way, that's the direction things are headed.
Yeah, and,
The, just on South Main Street alone, 32 new ones, a significant impact. So you're gonna be down there at least once a year,
yeah,
backing those out. These here, you're probably looking at least once a year, where you're gonna perform maintenance on them, and you have to get in there with the truck and back them out.
and would our current equipment we have work for that function?
Yes, at least one of them will.
Which one?
It's the Vector truck at the wastewater treatment plant. The problem with that is that they're on a regular schedule, so it's hard to get that truck. But we do have another jetter, but I don't remember if it has a back on it or not. I know we use it to jet out pipes and to do hydro excavation of utilities. I don't think, I can't remember if it's got a vac on it or not.
So I guess at this point, we have a very limited time frame. What is going to be needed from us in the near future in order to get something moving forward with this grant? Are there any decisions that have to come to us first before we start working on the grant?
Tonight is a discussion.
Right.
So until March, and the first meeting in March, you have to make all those decisions so that they can prepare the grant.
Would you be
So-
able to work with Strand and also get input from Patricia on what their concerns are so that you could develop some recommendations for us before the March 6th meeting?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so. Got a few things going on, but.
Sure. So do you still have questions for Patricia that you'd like to suspend the rules?
Well, if they can work together, no, I
Okay.
guess not. Then my fears are, or my concerns are, could be handled.
Okay.
Would there be a need to have a short part of the work session next meeting to let us know how progress is going? Or do you think that you can just do the recommendation in time for the March 6th meeting without having to touch base with us again?
I would be hard pressed to believe we'd have any time at the next meeting. I can't guarantee for sure, but there's a lot of questions they're going to ask you to answer about the composting.
Oh,
Yeah.
And then the amount of detail running across the multi-use facility and all the options related to it can be, I figure they're going to take up a full 3 hours.
Yeah.
okay.
No, I do have one question. How does this dovetail with the dredging?
Well, they're a combination of issues, and John might be able to answer them as well as I can, but the way I see it is part of the dovetail is that it makes the dredging last longer because it keeps less material from entering the mill pond. On the other hand, if you decide to do the dredging and you do this first, you add costs of mobilization and certain types of contract administration stuff. So you add a certain level of cost to a contract that you could have done for, a certain percentage less. The bigger
Can
the
you
con-
explain
the big-
what you mean by that?
So we issue a contract to do this. We have to have someone there we have to go through all the bidding documents. We have to award all the bids. We have to review we have to go through the pre-cons. We have to sign all the contracts. And if you do that once, is a lot different than doing it twice, because initially it doesn't matter if the contract is $100,000 or $1 million, you still do exactly the same thing. And so all that stuff that you gear up for, then there's a certain amount of cost, mobilization costs. When they hit you with a mobilization cost, if you can have one mobilization cost from one contract, even if it's slightly bigger, it's generally not the mobilization cost of two separate contracts. And all the other things that are associated with running a contract and running a project are doubled rather than, and then the bigger the contract, generally, the more bidders you get, the better prices you get. And so if you cut it into two small contracts rather than one big one, you add additional costs. So anytime you're asking the fiscal agent what he wants to do, he wants the biggest contract possible because he's going to look at it and say, I get the best bang for my buck across the board. So those are, if you're willing to spend the money on breaking up the contracts and giving yourself time to consider it, that's up to you. But I know from my standpoint, if you're asking me to control the costs, that's one of the easiest ways for me to do it.
Yeah, one of the thoughts we had in our report is if you were to couple dredging with this, and to Steve's point, it would be a bigger contract. There also is a recreational boating facilities grant that could fund dredging of a 50-foot wide, up to a 50-foot wide channel from a boat launch out to a lake. And that's something that could piggyback on the stream bank restoration and might make it all fiscally better, I guess.
Maybe this is, I might also address it to Patricia. Is there any negative impact on the mill pond or the lake or the channel to dredging?
So let's, if you get an answer, we'll suspend the rules. Do we have a motion to suspend the rules?
I'll move that.
It's pretty outside of the context of
Is
the
it?
agenda item. I mean, from the dredging study to the stormwater maintenance and erosion control is a pretty big step, I think,
Okay.
right at this point. I mean, the agenda item tonight is specifically with regard to the grant options that are before us, so.
Okay, no, that's.
I know,
fine.
but you know, you think about it, and dredging certainly does have to do with erosion control, so I think that I'll leave that to you. If you want to suspend the rules and you want to go down this path, then.
We'll take your,
Mr. Chairman, could I ask, could you respond to that informally somehow?
Yes.
I'm fine.
okay. Okay, so they'll take that offline. Sounds good. Okay, I did want to bring up the idea of public comment meeting for this and see what your thoughts are, because I know I don't think there's any good time to do anything like that before we'd have to get a grant ready for this type of thing. So if we were just going to do a public comment, I'm assuming that would be more related to the actual dredging only. And we could work something like that out after we look for the grant.
I know we have one PIL coming up in March for the Mulberry Street project.
Right.
So I guess we'll see how that dovetail together.
Yeah, and we
Because
can,
we don't have to file these grants together, do we?
Which ones?
Like
The
safe
one
boating.
for the boat launch dredging one, that comes later in the year, doesn't
I
it?
believe so.
That gives us more time to look at it.
okay. Okay,
Yeah, then we can, like he said, they give us a certain amount of time to delay on the one, so we could hold it up and try and fast track the other one and see if they can be run together, if that's what we decide to do.
okay.
Did we talk at all about options of the bank stabilization?
A little bit.
Okay. And I won't go into.
Steeper slope versus more gentle.
Or something besides the rocks and stuff like that. So that stuff was brought up, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. If there's no more questions, we thank you.
You're welcome. I can get you those, this sheet.
Bless you.
Hand those out to you here.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
That moves us on to item C. Excuse me. Discussion decision on the request from the Lake Mills Area Chamber of Commerce to use the community center for casino night fundraiser. Could you read the title, please?
City Council Motion 18-2-1-1, authorizing the use of Lake Mills Community Center by the Lake Mills Chamber of Commerce.
And do we have a motion to approve this motion? 18-2-1-1.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
And is there any discussion?
I assume this is regular?
Regular?
They've
Yeah.
done this a couple times now,
No,
right?
this is, it used to be done by Rock Lake Activity Center.
Yeah.
But it's similar to the Knickerbocker for Main Street, so it's the same process.
It's a fundraiser, so it has to come before the council
Yeah.
to use the community center.
So Rock Lake's not going to do one?
No, they're not doing it anymore.
Okay, let's call the vote.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Fritsch?
Aye.
Ms. Schmidt?
Aye.
Mr. Fields?
Aye.
Motion passed 4-0.
Item D, discussion decision on election registration officials.
City Council Motion 18-2-1-2, appointment of election registration officials.
Do we have a motion
So move.
and a second?
Second.
Does anybody have any questions or discussion on this? Let's call the vote.
Mr. Fritsch?
Aye.
Ms. Schmidt?
Aye.
Mr. Fields?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Motion passed 4-0.
Item E, Resolution 18-03, sale of public land in the business park. Rob and Kim Campbell.
Resolution 18-3, authorizing sale of city-owned real estate located in the Lake Mills Business Park.
And do we have a motion for Resolution 1803?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. Discussion on this. We got Steve's info on this. Do you care to go into anything else? It might have got unplugged.
Excuse me.
Might have got unplugged. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I have two? For my wife? Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Whoa.
Yowza.
You have this on your computers on the agenda? Okay. This is Industrial Drive. This is the old Selgen property. This is Astlin Engineering. This is Astlin here, these two sites. This one down here is actually the new light and water building. And this is the site they're talking about, right here. And you can see that it's got a substantial number of wetlands on it. And then to top it off, if you look at this, and I think you have this map too, it's got a substantial amount of floodplain in it. So out of the 10.8 acres, you have about 2+ buildable acres, which is primarily up in this corner right here. Right here. The other problem with the site is the sanitary sewer, you're going to have to pump. Do I have that map here? I thought I had that one. Anyways, the sewer's gonna have to flow down here, and then you're gonna have to pump it up along the south side of the Astlin building to a sanitary sewer that runs in the Tamarack apartment complex. So it has a few problems as a site that don't make it the best. The fact that they're actually buying the whole 10 acres is probably a substantial advantage to us. We anticipated we'd probably have to hang on to it and use it for flood storage and that type of thing. The fact that they're willing to buy it, it still has to be used for flood storage, but they actually have to pay taxes on it. It's kind of an advantage to us. So not only do we not have to worry about maintaining it, we actually make some money off of it. Not a bad deal. So overall, I felt that the price for the lot was of value to us. And they're running a small operation here that I don't think they're going to sell there. I think they're going to produce there. But I can't guarantee that. I haven't had a full conversation with them. But from what I understand, they're looking at production on that site and then probably a downtown site.
So with the stormwater retention, whatever is built in there, I'm assuming we still have that requirement to go through and do inspections and things like that, similar to what we do with the property over there across the way with the
neighborhood?
the neighborhood.
Arbor Creek,
yeah.
the detention basin?
Yes,
Technically, no.
okay.
This is a little bit different than a detention basin. This is just flood storage, so.
Can we put a deed restriction on the parcel that it has to be maintained in some fashion for flood storage? Because, environmental laws do change over time, and so it would be nice to be able to have it locked in.
Currently, you'd have to fill out a LOMA. And under the LOMA, you'd have to go through and justify the elevations. And we've already done that, so we know where that district is. So they would, in order to be able to get an adjustment, they would have to do comp storage. You'd have to dig a hole somewhere else. So it's not impossible, but from a flood standpoint, we're not damaged. Your question was a little bit different, I think, in that as environmental laws become less and less restrictive, being able to maintain that is of value to us, and I don't know that it hurts us. I don't know that they would want it, but it doesn't hurt us.
Well, we could counter with that as a proposed deed restriction. Because, essentially, we're selling the entire parcel that, a lot of it is not worthwhile for development, but we're selling the entire parcel for what it would cost to buy 2 acres. And so I think that we do deserve the opportunity to at least try to lock in how the rest of the parcel is going to be used in the future for the environmental causes that, there's problems with it, and that's why we aren't asking for the full dollar amount for the purchase. But at the same time, I think we could ask for that there's some kind of a deed restriction written in, just like we had deed restrictions written into parcels that we have sold along Ditch 35 that have to do with the bike path and those sorts of things. It doesn't have to be overly restrictive, but just something in there that at least provides a little bit of notice that there are expectations. Because like the question about Arbor Creek, that was a whole different thing. That's under the developer's agreement and everything, and we wouldn't have that kind of right. That I would feel a lot better if we had something written into the deed and do that through a counter offer.
Would you want it to include both flood storage and wetlands?
Whatever you think is appropriate.
Because we're more harmed by the flood storage than we are the wetlands.
Right.
I'm not going to say that, and I should frame that, in a direct capacity we're more harmed by the flood storage, so.
I seem to recall that there's a ditch there too. You know, this is a difficult parcel, but, you know, maybe we would have some reason to want the ditch not to be obstructed. I don't know if that's considered a navigable ditch or not.
I believe a portion of it is, and it is considered wetlands. But they could put a culvert in and drive across it. That's not impossible to do. You know what it takes to get the ditch filled. I can tell you what that takes. It takes a lot of years, at least under the current environmental condition. Yeah, I don't think that the ditch is the worry. I think the flood storage would be more, you know, and that's mainly in the back parcel here anyways, which I think they were looking at more using it for recreational type uses than, you know, like walking paths and those types of things.
So,
Do we have any idea what is going to be manufactured?
I'm pretty sure it's going to be strong spirits.
Would
That
that
was,
be?
remember, they were the ones that were looking at the downtown site at the Plan Commission.
I just asked this in regard to the apartments. Would smell be an issue?
I don't think any more than it would have been downtown. And we
Or
would've-
noise, for that matter?
Yeah, I don't think that'll be an issue here.
so what are your thoughts?
You might have a traffic problem with people walking across the street.
Sorry, can't get back to it.
Well, I'd like to move that we keep the purchase price the same, but that we counter with whatever language Dan deems appropriate to be able to get a deed restriction that meets our needs for the flood storage. And if you feel that it's important for the wetland also, but if not, flood storage for sure.
So we'll make that a
Yeah.
amendment.
Yeah, that's my motion too.
That's, the first part I find satisfactory, the second part I'm a little queasy on, because it's not really what I determine or Dan determines, it's kind of what you guys determine.
Well,
We wanted-
I'm just giving Dan the latitude to actually fashion the language. I'm at this
So,
point
But,
not
what about
prepared
the-
to do it.
you know, it sounded like we had the latitude to determine whether the wetlands was included or not.
I don't have a strong feeling one way or another, but maybe the rest of the council does.
That's what it,
I don't have a, yeah,
I guess my feeling is whatever seems to be.
yeah, I would say don't worry about the wetlands if we don't think it's as big of an issue for us as having that flood zone. So deal with the flood.
Well, so there's a couple ways to address that in the counteroffer. We can propose a sale of just the 2 acres that's buildable, that we identify as buildable, or we could propose a sale of the entire 10.8 with some deed restrictions with regard to either the flood storage issue and/or the wetlands issue.
My thought is sell the whole thing with some deed restrictions on flood storage.
Would we become liable at all if there was flooding there and we just sold the 2 acres?
I don't think so. There's knowledge that it's in the floodplain already. It's caveat emptor, buyer beware, if you're purchasing this property, so long as proper disclosures have been made, the decision comes down to that, you know what you're purchasing. It goes through a process, site plan and such, buildings would have to be permitted to be built there, and there's plenty of examination that would go on in that process, but to your question, I wouldn't anticipate that being an issue.
yeah, there's site plan review. We make sure that they are a certain distance above. So their first floor elevation, I think, has to be 716. And it has to be 1 foot above the curb. So any water that would flood in that area would run into the street before it run into the building. We do all kinds of special provisions to make sure that a building doesn't flood, so the 2 acres there meets all those conditions. And no, it's a good building site, and the flood, it just wouldn't happen.
And I guess.
Not
all-
unless we had a
If we
real
did
act of
something-
God.
Or if we did something wrong in the process of site approval or something like that. I can see where there's a potential for liability there, but not at this point.
All we're asking is flood retention be maintained on the plat, or on the
And
property.
probably, any kind of deed restriction, we'd have to very clearly state what the expectation is, what the flood land is, what the required maintenance or what the required retention is with regard to that. So there'd be some thought that needs to go into that statement. We'd have to identify and then restrict.
Don't we have control over this in the long run anyways through the drainage district?
We are the drainage district.
I know, that's what I was saying. So we retain control over the floodways anyways with the drainage district. They just
So-
couldn't, even before they got a Loma, they'd have to get permission from us.
So would that mean that asking for deed restrictions really doesn't give us a whole lot?
Well, to Vicky's point earlier, I mean, regulations do change, and there's the potential that once the property becomes private property, there could be unanticipated changes in the
Yeah.
future.
What would happen what are our potential outcomes if there were no deed restrictions and the flood retention wasn't maintained? Where do we see issues happening down there?
We're not going to change the environmental laws.
But as the drainage district, we would probably have to sue. It would be so much cleaner, I think, if everybody knows up front what the expectations are.
But I'm going back to, we are not changing the environmental laws, the state is. So we have no position in it from the standpoint of any damages or any expectations.
No. I guess maybe I should word that different. If for some reason the retention wasn't maintained there, and we had a flood down in that area, how many other properties do you think could be damaged because that piece wasn't maintained? I mean, do we have anything that shows us? I know in our flood maps, we see that if,
It's hard to know. I mean,
Yeah.
we'd have to do some calculations. They probably have to do some pretty substantial level of filling. I know from our standpoint, we wouldn't be liable for any damage, but I think Vicky's point is we want to maintain control of it because we want to reduce those issues.
the potential for issues to occur.
All right.
Gotcha. Nope, I understand.
Every
So-
day we lose more and more control locally. And so if you attach a deed restriction to it, I assume that sticks whether the
Whether it's
regulations
sold.
are there or not.
Since well, we haven't voted on whether or not we're going to do the deed restriction, but if that ends up becoming the case, I think it would be premature to adopt Resolution 18-3 because we're still in a negotiation phase with the buyer, because they might tell us to go pound sand. So would it hurt anything to table Resolution 18-3 until such time that we work it out and we make sure that we've got an accepted counter?
They're actually,
No, we can go through that process. The natural life of the original offer is about to expire. So we could counter and not have anything to work with at all, potentially, but no, there's no, other than that, we may lose the potential of this offer, but that's an issue that you deal with in this circumstance.
Mr. Campbell's here if you want to
He's
ask
here
him.
if we want to ask any questions.
Did we have a second?
Yes.
Oh,
No?
yeah.
Do we?
Not for the amendment, no.
No, not for the amendment.
So if we want to suspend the rules to let him speak to us? Do we have a motion for suspending the
moved.
rules? Okay, then a
Second.
second. And call the vote, please.
Ms. Schmidt?
Aye.
Mr. Fields?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Fritsch?
Aye.
Motion passed 4-0.
Come on out. I can see it was hard for you to sit back there.
Deja vu all over again.
Yeah.
Rob Campbell, 433 College Street. Plan for the site is, we hope it will be our secondary site. We are still trying to work out a place downtown that we can find for our distillery. The idea would be then, as we grow, as we expand, we're gonna need a place to age barrels, we're gonna need a place to store grain, hopefully. And what we're looking at is the 2 acres of buildable land should be enough for us. The primary reason that we kept the other acreage as part of the offer was to kind of create an ambiance if we ever did decide to do something out there at that site, whether we, we're gonna, have occasions or events out there, that's part of the, not feeling like it's sitting in the middle of an industrial park. So that was the primary reason that other additional acreage was included at all, was just to give it a feeling, or for the location, so. I don't know if you have any more than that. That helps.
Would you be adverse to us putting a deed restriction for the flood storage on the property?
I guess I would have to know a little bit more about what the language looks like. I guess that's also what I was looking at in terms of tax purposes. If we are paying taxes on it, how is that aspect going to be taxed? I understand the 2 acres that we would be building on would have a certain different price for that to be taxed, but then what does that other 9 acres, what are we going to be paying for that if something we can't do anything with? And I guess that was part of the initial discussion we had with the city before we did the updated offer too.
Yeah, and that conversation, but it relates to the fact that you can't, land is taxed at what land is taxed at. There's assessed value and then the rate has to be applied. That's by Constitution. So if he owns the land, it depends on what the value assigned to the real estate is. And this isn't an arm's length real estate transaction. So when you look at it and you're saying these lots are this is $17,000 an acre, or you divide the total by whatever, they're not going to do that. They're going to come in and they're going to look at it and say, you got an industrial use on here, the actual value of that in the rest of the market is this, and they're going to assign a value. And then they'll look at the flood storage and they might assign a storage a value to that real estate based on what they see in other places, and same with the wetlands. So you could end up with a totally different set of real estate values than what we're discussing here. Ours
Yeah,
is,
I agree.
so from that standpoint, it's a different conversation on how much on the real estate, and we said we'd take it either way. You could take the 2 acres or the whole acreage, and I guess from my standpoint, when I looked at it, I didn't look at it from the same position Vicky is. I thought, you're not going to be able to do anything with the rest of that real estate other than use it for kind of open areas. You can plant trees, you can put shrubs in, you can make it a wildlife area, you can put trails in. But I do agree that I do see a lot of change in the environmental laws, and you may be able to, at some point in time, to make a substantial change in the uses on the lot.
Yeah, and the flood storage wouldn't be over the whole lot, would it? It would just
No,
be over
no.
a confined area.
It would be probably about 4 acres on the west edge.
And that's already flood storage, so it's not,
Technically, he can't use
Creating
it now
a-
anyways unless the rules change, so
yeah, it's not creating a new burden on the property, it's just,
maintaining an old one.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that if laws change and things change in the future, all of a sudden the flood storage doesn't just go away.
Yeah, and we don't have any intent of doing anything, you know, it's not like we're planning on filling it. I mean, if we wanted a bigger site, we would look at a different site. I mean,
Right.
that, you know, and I guess partly too, I was trying to find out, you know, how it would be perceived tax-wise, you know, those back acres, if we have limitations. Tried to contact the assessor while he was here today, but he was gone by the time I called, so.
They will be different than the other acreage, but I can't tell you exactly what it is. But I know flood storage and wetlands are different. They're not the same. But they're also not, they won't be considered the same as the 2 acres that are buildable. Those will be much more.
Yep. Yeah, and that's why I found most have been assessed at about 30,000 per
Yep.
acre,
Yep.
which, I understand that, as just, again, trying to figure out what that back part's gonna be.
It just depends on what the assessor's looking at and how it's laying out and how you're actually using it. If you allow it to grow up into a kind of a wild area, will be different than if you continue to farm, if someone start farming that area.
Okay.
Because then they're gonna start looking at it and saying, well, farm acres are going for $9,000 an acre,
Yep.
but then you know, the only piece of property that can be taxed at a different rate is farmland. So if you're farming it, I can guarantee you're gonna pay $200 an acre, which is probably as little as you're gonna pay
Yep.
under any condition.
So I guess with all that being said, well, where do I want to go here?
I mean, I
I
guess
kind of
it's,
want to come right out and ask you, what would be your best scenario? Would you rather just have the 2 acres and not deal with the other stuff right now, and then maybe later on, knowing that we probably will have a hard time getting rid of it, look at it later? Or would you go with a deed restriction and take the whole 10 acres? I'm not trying to tie you into
Yeah,
anything
no.
right now. We just want your opinions, what your thoughts are.
I mean, I guess too is the deed restriction, partly knowing how many acres it is as well too, you know, from me looking at the map, the floodplain went right up to the ditch, that's right around the 2 acres. So I mean, I don't know how much of that is,
No, that was,
at least the map I looked at, so.
yeah. You can see that it comes in, this is actually our lot here.
Yeah.
And so this is the portion of, and then all this is your lot, but there's wetland, this is a wetlands up here.
Yep.
And then there's a wetlands right here. So while that's, so out of the 10 acres, you're probably looking at 3 that are in the flood storage.
Okay.
But then you have wetlands, which we haven't assigned yet, and of all of it, I believe that's probably more likely to see an environmental law change than the rest of it. I guess that's not,
And the wetlands are part of the appeal of why we want the lot. So we're not gonna plow them under.
So is the flood storage area that hash marked area on the map?
yeah, it's this area here.
So, you know, if you wrote the deed restriction consistent with that map, then we would know and you would know
Yep.
what the area is that we're talking about.
Yeah. And I guess I wasn't at first delineating the difference between flood storage area and floodplain, which after looking at that, I see that, you know, there is a difference.
Yeah.
I guess another option would be that we could redraw the lines on this lot if the city for some reason is interested in maintaining and keeping that flood storage or portions of the wetlands. We certainly could counter that. We're willing to sell that 2 acre parcel along with 4 other acres and just
draw the square the way that we envision it.
Or we could sell the whole parcel and then do an easement for the flood storage.
That's another option.
So it sounds like there's still details that need to be worked out. What was the established closing date for this?
I don't, we just changed it, and I don't remember what it is, and, you know, it's not an urgent, you know, we're not going away. The only thing I would say too is about what'd be interesting is through that flood storage area is that does give access to the bike lane that's behind it too, would be, you know, an interest we would have. I don't know if
Getting
that-
access to the bike lane, you'd have to get across ditch 35.
That's what I was wondering.
It just was a thought.
It's not impossible, but it'll take, you'll probably have to have it engineered.
Okay.
Okay, so
Is your amendment still on the table?
I believe so, that we would just counter with a deed restriction that provides for the flood considerations.
Do you want that as a formal amendment?
What were we calling it, flood storage?
flood storage, yeah.
Yeah, that the flood storage as it's shown on that map would be the area for the deed restriction. And we could have that would be sufficient so that our interests are protected as well as yours.
And do we have a second on that?
Second.
Could you call a vote, please?
Mr. Fields?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Fritsch?
Aye.
Ms. Schmidt?
Aye.
Motion passed 4-0.
So, go ahead.
It looks like Resolution 18-3, since Section 2 says that city manager is authorized to execute the documents and take any other actions as necessary. Maybe we don't have to amend it.
Right after we just did.
No, I was saying that we have to do a counter offer. But
Oh.
once the counter offer is offered and accepted, then we've got the documents that would be needed in order to do
So
the
that-
land sale.
Meaning we can go ahead and
Move forward on the other
move
vote.
forward on 18-3.
I think we could.
Does that sound?
Do you think we could, Dan?
I'd prefer not to. I'd rather have an accepted offer prior to that point, or have a counter offer that we present.
Okay. Yeah, and if it's something that time is a necessary thing, we could tuck that into our next meeting.
Oh,
It's-
I'm going to get a counter offer to them, certainly this week, so.
Yeah, so even if we have our work session, we could have this as a first agenda item.
Yes.
It shouldn't take anywhere near the amount of time this took in order to approve this.
Well, and our counter offer is really the process of negotiation here. You'll certainly be able to, counter back and state, what your ultimate goal here is and what would work for you. Yep.
So that means we're going to table
The resolution.
18-3, so
I'll move that.
do we have a second?
Second?
And a vote, please.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Mr. Fritsch?
Aye.
Ms. Schmidt?
Aye.
Mr. Fields?
Aye.
Motion passed 4-0.
Thank you. All right, recommendation for future agendas. Anybody have anything other than what we've already talked about?
Should we talk about having a special meeting so that the concerns of the Rock Lake Improvement Association being able to have a public forum to discuss the dredging before we make a decision on the erosion control and that sort of stuff gets taken care of before March 6th meeting? Especially if we're being asked to make decisions on the dredging as well as the stormwater or the erosion control. it probably, you know, it would be probably good that we could hear from people that live on the mill pond if we're going to be making a number of decisions in doing that grant.
I think that's a good idea.
And I don't know that it's vital that it not be as part of a council meeting. However, if March 6th is when the engineer wants us to make a decision, and we can't take the time during the work session later this month, and we probably can't tuck it in front of the 6 p.m. planning meeting on the 27th, we probably are looking at a special meeting time to just talk about the mill pond, the dredging, and the erosion control.
You're thinking the Rock Lake improvement group and the homeowners?
Yeah, well, it'll be open to the public, so I would hope that Rock Lake Improvement Association could come, as well as the property owners and anybody else that has an interest in it.
Yeah, I guess finding a date is going to be the biggest challenge. Not for me, but for everybody else. So,
Yeah, we originally had the 15th of February was going to be our planning meeting. Maybe that night is available to us? I'm not sure. And I don't, you know, I think it's still important that we have a little bit of formality in the meeting, that the council is still seated here and it's in this room, and so that we don't throw everything out to have this public hearing. But I think that there's some merit in the council hearing what the property owners and the Rock Lake Improvement Association have to say before we start making some decisions on March 6th that maybe kind of set it in stone.
what did we have planned on the 15th?
We were originally going to do our next planning meeting, but then we pushed off from the
Oh, you're
15th
right.
to the 27th
Yep.
because there's no plan commission meeting.
Is that enough time to notice something like that? Do we need to have more time to notice it?
I don't know that we're statutorily required to have any published notice, but we would have to let
Oh,
people
and
know.
we have adequate time anyway. We have
Yeah.
a week right now.
And you're thinking what time? 7 or?
I'm thinking 7, but, you know, it's open to what you guys are thinking, because
Yeah, but
7
would
makes
Might
easy.
it be better to start at 6:30? Might be a long one.
Yeah, maybe. I'm just worried about folks that want to get here but work in Madison or Milwaukee or something like that.
I got a feeling it might be well with them.
Yeah.
Then that way it would give us some time to digest the comments
Yeah.
before we make a final decision on March 6th. Might also give
Yep.
Steve a little bit of time to start working with Strand and Patricia in terms of developing some recommendations for us. We wouldn't necessarily have to have them at that time, but it would give Steve a chance to start working on them. What are your thoughts, Steve?
So you're not going to do a presentation at the meeting, you're just going to hold public comment?
I wasn't planning on presenting anything.
Well, maybe it might be better
Do we
to,
need to have Strand come
Strand.
back?
yeah, well, or at least have the maps that they could look at.
So then we don't know when Strand's available?
Well, could we have the maps at least?
Yeah, we can have the maps. Again, normally at a public comment period, you do some minimum amount of presentation to give them something to understand, and then you have someone.
Could you do that?
Probably, this is a little outside my realm. I've never done a dredging project before, and I don't know that.
Well, how about this? Do we have any strong feelings about when we can't meet? So that then Strand could work with Steve on when they could meet, and as long as it's not a night that somebody's already said, no, can't meet that night, we could still have a special meeting. I don't have, other than the 13th, which is Public Works Board, I don't have anything that would say I can't meet.
Yeah, the only thing I have is Wednesday nights from 6 to 6:30. That's the only time I have that's,
And the 21st to the 23rd, I'm traveling for work.
Okay, so the 21st to the 23rd are out?
Correct, I'll be traveling.
27th is out,
Could I send a calendar survey?
20th is out.
Sure, you
I'll
could
do it
send
on
one of
14th.
those.
Yeah, we probably don't want to do it on the 14th.
Yeah, probably not.
And would it be best not on Friday?
Yeah, I think if we're trying to get the public to come, we probably would want to stay away from Friday night.
So we have the...
Saturday?
Well, not true, but yeah, 12th, 15th, 19th. You said 20th you'll be here?
20th, I'll be here.
Yeah, we have a meeting that night.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
That's our
that's
normal
right,
meeting.
sorry. 19th or 26th or 28th, well, yeah, 28th.
Yeah, 20th.
So we would just need to find out if somebody from Strand is available any of those times, and then we can plan.
No, the 27th, we got the goal session.
Right.
Busy.
Good.
So we're talking the 12th, 15th, 19th, 26th,
26th
and
or 28th.
28th as
12th?
possible dates.
What date, 12th, 19th?
12th, 15th, 19th, the 26th, or the 28th. Okay, awesome. Anything else? All right. Item 10. We're going to convene in a closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.85 1G, conferring with legal counsel who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to be involved, and 19.85 1E, deliberating or negotiating the investing of public funds and negotiating of lease terms whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. We won't be reconvening in here. So do we need a motion to go to closed session?
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
And call a vote, please.
Mr. Fritsch?
Aye.
Ms. Schmidt?
Aye.
Mr. Fields?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
All right.
Motion passed 4-0.